other than a few national things that are scheduled for later in the year. I'm not sure if ESPN touched it.
Well, I can give you the explanation you've been unable to find someplace else. There is a selection order, and that selection order it's not every other selection. I don't know it off the top of my head, but ESPN, ABC had I think the first 4 selections, and then Fox got a couple, and then ESPN gets a few more. One of the differences for Fox is that we now are on Fox broadcast television. So, for instance, the Kansas State-Oklahoma game last week was a Fox over-the-air broadcast game, and we didn't have that available to us on a national basis like we do now. And so the selection process goes throughout the entire year. It isn't on a weekend-by-weekend basis. ESPN, ABC can go in and make their selections on Thanksgiving weekend if they want to. And their selections tend to skew towards the back end of the season. That, I guess, was a strategic thing that they chose to do. And so that selection order on, I think this year it's 46 games, is articulated throughout the season. And they go, they take the whole 14-week season, and they select when it's their turn. They draft the game that they want, and that's why Fox has some of the early games, and ESPN will have a steady diet of the late games. But that's how the process.
You also mentioned something about basketball. I don't know about the Lions who are preseason challenge. Any here involved any other than that? You're talking to obviously the Big Ten, the SEC, the ACC are already pretty much taken up with their own challenges.
We basically are talking to everybody, because those most of those contracts have relatively near-term sunsets, and so we're having active conversations, and it could at some point in time extend to other sports as well as men's basketball.
I was going to ask along that line, are there any plans or thoughts of increasing your relationship with the SEC beyond the Champions Bowl? I mean, creating, I don't know what it would be, but.
Well, we're a partner with them. At the same time, we're a competitor. It's kind of like our TV deal. Fox and ESPN are bitter competitors, but they collaborate on the Pac-12 package and on the Big 12 package. We are partners in 2 enormous ventures: the BCS, the playoff, and the Champions Bowl. And I think it's reasonable to assume that we'll look for other ways to activate on that partnership as well. But I don't know that we're going to do that exclusively with the SEC. But I do think there are conferences that bring more equity to the table than others, and that equity is reflected in what we're doing with the BCS and postseason football. And I think as we look for partners, we're probably looking within that group for partnerships, and what those may be is unknown at this point in time.
Would that be possibly affected by some of the scenarios involved in determining the playoff teams down the road, like strength of schedule may help to try to increase your non-conference schedule earlier in the season?
Well, you're right that strength of schedule is going to be an element. It's strength of non-conference schedule as well as strength of conference schedule. Obviously, we do quite well relative to the latter, but I think it's going to depend a little bit on what circumstance each program is in. Somebody that's trying to build a program from unsuccessful past is not going to schedule a murderer's row in anticipation of getting into the 14 playoff. Having said that, there's a derivative effect that comes from who you play and who they play, and I expect that there'll be some sort of an index. It won't be exactly like the ratings percentage index that the basketball committee uses, but there'll be some metric that we use on non-conference scheduling. And I think that metric and its impact on who's selected and how they're seated will, over time, cause people to schedule more competitively. And the other piece of that is as an important nuance to it is we want to be able to schedule high-level competition in the early portion of the season without the risk of a loss eliminating you from consideration for the playoff. And it's, you know, if last year, as an example, if Oregon and LSU had it to do over again, Oregon might not have opted to take that game early in the season because they fought back from that loss throughout the entire year. And so there's a balancing act there, but strength of schedule is going to be a piece of it. And I think you'll see institutions that have a chance to be in the hunt being careful, maybe not necessarily about playing all top 10 teams in the preseason, but perhaps avoiding teams that might damage their strength of schedule down the road.
Do you think that means you may eventually go away from teams playing the 1AA schools every year?
Well, I don't, the 1AA, the FCA, or FCS teams, I think there'll be a way to weight that, and I think there has to be, and therefore institutions will be able to make a considered decision based upon, you know, if you're playing two other highly ranked or traditionally strong programs, you might be able to afford to play an FCS school, and that'll be a local decision. On the other hand, if you play three of them, you're probably going to be penalized and should be. You know, there's a balance between getting the football team ready for the football season and scheduling 3 home blowouts that sell tickets but don't make you any better and don't represent any sort of strengthening in your schedule. I think institutions are going to have to undertake a considered process to decide what's best for them.
Have you heard of other elements that'll go into the selection process or a timetable when that stuff will be flushed out? I know you're certain teams saying that they're kind of waiting to see how they're going to schedule some of those last non-conference teams.
My sense is that the committee will do some of that once the selection committee is identified. My guess is that it's going to be larger rather than smaller. It will include representation from every conference plus some others, some number of others, and I could see it being as large as 24 and as small as 14 or 15. If I had to guess, I'd guess it'd be larger, and I'd guess that group will have some input into how the metrics are shaped, just as the basketball committee has a lot of input into how the RPI metrics are shaped. But strength of schedule will be a part of it, and you know that's what we have to figure out is how do we arm that committee with the tools that it takes to differentiate the achievements of one institution from the achievements of the other, because there's always going to be that 4th place team that gets in and that 5th place team that gets left out, or that 12th ranked team that gets in and the 13th ranked team that gets left out of the bowl championship series games. And so we have to get it right, and I think part of it will be imposed by the commissioners group, and I think part of it will be developed by the selection committee once they're seated. And the other thing is, we've talked a fair amount about whether or not it makes some sense to configure the committee soon enough to do a shakedown through the coming seasons. And I think most people think that's a good idea if we can do it without being a distraction. And obviously, if you have a parallel process going with a group, there's going to be a lot of media interest, and so we have to kind of weigh how that all fits together.
On the index that you speak of for selecting teams, I think a lot of people would figure wins, strength of schedule, conference championship would be the 3 big determining factors. I'm sure it's more